The electric guitar is an instrument whose history can be divided up into two eras, before and after Jimi Hendrix. This was written by Greg Tate, who was a writer and also one of the founders of the Black Rock Coalition, based in New York. Jimi Hendrix is a huge inspiration on me. He is one of the major reasons that I am a musician. Seriously, like my dad was the first one that I've seen playing music, and he always had musical instruments around me. You know, him and my mom were also in a band together, which I ended up joining much later. So that was my first inspiration. You know, I used to watch my dad play with his friends in the park, play music with his friends in the park, playing congas and all kinds of percussive instruments. Cats would be out there with bass guitars and stuff. And I even saw a young cat um, that was also inspirational because he was a kid and he was playing and jamming out with my dad and his dad. But what really made me want to pick up an instrument and just be all about that life is Jimi Hendrix. I was around 11, maybe 12 when I first saw Jimi Hendrix on a music video show. I think it was some classic rock music video show. It was a few of them that I used to watch that would come on in that era in the mid 80s. And all I could see was this black man with a huge natural making this loud, heavy noise, like just music, and all these crazy noises coming out of this guitar. And what he was doing sound-wise was so direct and focused, yet spontaneous and free. This man blew my mind, man, when I saw him as a little kid on TV. And keep in mind, this is obviously years after he's passed and all that. You know, this is the 80s. And I was just discovering a lot of music that was older than me or put out around the same time that I was born. Some of it my dad even had around. And so I got into a lot of this older music, rock and roll, funk, soul, all this stuff. A lot of rock and roll, though, especially a lot of heavier stuff. You know, so yeah, Jimmy, it was like an Uncle Sam moment. You know, I don't particularly care for Uncle Sam, but you guys know that poster where Uncle Sam basically is pointing at you saying the army wants you, or join the army, or America wants you. Well, Jimi Hendrix was my Uncle Sam, and maybe it was a figment of my imagination. The guitar was pointed at me and basically saying, "You're wanted in this sound army." And, you know, I'm saying that not just because I'm a part of a collective called Sound Army. I'm just saying in general. And Jimmy, I was like, okay, I'll enlist. I'm down, you know, like, and I wanted to play the guitar ever since. Now, most of you guys that know my work know it's mostly on bass, but I started off wanting to play the guitar, and I focused on bass because there was no guitar at the school that I was going to, and my dad just suggested it, and I've been playing it ever since. And ironically, Jimi Hendrix played bass too on a lot of things. I think on a lot of his solo stuff as well, but he played bass as well too. But even when I performed, you know, I would emulate him because it just Jimmy, man, my stuff is my own now, and I pretty much as a performer took notes from Jimmy, and if you guys like the way that I perform, he's definitely a major root in that as well. For those that have seen me live, even though I can't say that I do the same thing. There's certain things that I would emulate, but that's another story. This ain't just about me. Being that this is Jimi Hendrix's birthday, I thought I would do a special Black History of Rock and Roll tribute to him. Jimi Hendrix pretty much changed not only the face of guitar, but also music. He's inspired so many people directly and indirectly, so many genres of music as well. And just an amazing player, man, that you could not really put in a category or box, but he kind of helped spawn a lot of different genres too, or help send other genres into different movements, or different phases, because of his playing. Jimmy started off playing in like a lot of different bands. He played the Chitlin Circuit, which, for all of you guys that don't know what the Chitlin Circuit was, it was basically a bunch of places that black people could play, especially for other black people, obviously, because they could not play a lot of the regular clubs because of the whole Jim Crow thing and all that racist BS. Um, so there was a network of different clubs that they could play around America, and that was the Chitlin Circuit. You know, he played with Little Richard. This is, Little Richard actually is my grandma's cousin. I think I said that on another video, but I'm not sure. No joke. I wish I would love to meet him. My uncles have met him before, but I've never met him. But Jimmy played with Little Richard, and I should post that. I don't know if I'm gonna do it, but I'll just post a link. Little Richard basically, there only had to be one outlandish cat in his band. Jimmy, his style of playing was one thing that was pretty outrageous, like Little Richard's, but also the way that he looked and his stage persona was like the same. It was out of this world, like even back then when he was playing with Little Richard. I wish I could have seen that. That would have been sick. So Little Richard kicked him out of the band because he's like, hey, there could only be one showman. And on this one interview, he's all, hey, I knew he was going to be famous anyway. But Jimmy played with the Isley Brothers. This is not the Isley Brothers. He's played with a lot of different people. And Curtis Knight, this is Curtis Knight's band, actually. Curtis Knight went on to not only play music, he wasn't just known for playing music, but he also, from what I know, managed, I guess, a few different groups. One of them being a friend of mine's band, the classic punk rocker band. I actually did a Black History of Rock and Roll tribute to this band, the band Pure Hell. He managed them for a while, and that's a whole nother story. I'm sure members of that band can tell you what that was all about. But yeah, Jimmy played in his band. Jimmy was in the Army at one point, and he got dishonorably discharged. I always read about him messing up his ankle or whatever, but he was kind of a rebel, like, I guess from the story that I've read, basically he got profiled for something, and then he basically had to either do jail or army time. He went into the military, hated the military, had his guitar every time, and was just kind of being, I guess, what people would call insubordinate, or just really rebellious with when it came to orders given by people in the army. So they let him go. And I've heard other stories, and the one story I heard I'm not going to say here. You can research that one yourself. Jimi Hendrix, like, one thing that tripped me out, I didn't really know there was a definition for this, but I think it's called synesthesia. Yeah, synesthesia. I'm not saying it right. It's like where you could actually see colors when you're listening to music, and people have it in different contexts, like numbers and all that. I actually thought it was normal to see colors while you hear music, because I do that. And when I found out that Jimi Hendrix basically sees colors, in music, I was like, what? You mean that's not normal? So I think I might have that, because I've always seen colors while I've played music. And no, I don't do drugs. This is not something that's, has anything to do with psychedelics. And from what I understand, Jimi Hendrix had that gift too. Jimmy basically had so many different, like, phases in his career, but I think the fact that he was a musician that, like, when you even think about, like, the way that he played the guitar, I mean, this dude, like, Seriously, he could make it sound as if he's talking to you like I am right now, but at the same time, make a human shape shift into the whole environment, like whether it be bomb droppings or nature type stuff, trees, I mean birds, I mean his playing was so imaginative, it was just out of this world. Like literally, this guy, like seriously, was just a force to be reckoned with when it came to using even whatever effects he had. And from what my dad told me, who my dad actually saw him back in the day, um, he said he saw him with one pedal and he was doing all these noises and stuff, and just the crazy stuff that he was doing with that one pedal. It was just out of control, man, and out of this world and mind-boggling. This was a very interesting quote by a guy named Stephen Del Petit. I've never really heard of him until I saw this quote, and from what I know, he's a musician. I looked up his name. But anyway, he said something very interesting, and I'll tell you the reason after I read the quote. Psychedelia was the burgeoning trend, and Hendrix in those flamboyant clothes was already fit for it. So it's not surprising lots of fans didn't see him as a blues man. But guys like Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck would have known exactly where Hendrix was coming from. They realized Hendrix personified everything that every English blues musician aspired to. He was their worst fear because he wasn't 60 years old and from the plantation. He was the same age as them, but what they'd learned secondhand, he learned on the circuit, playing with the originals. I've always said this when it came to basically Hendrix being the real deal and them facing that, it's especially when it came to the blue being that blues man, being that Afro-American blues man. He was actually the real deal, and he played with a lot of the people that they dug. When Jimmy went to the UK, he blew a lot of minds. This is a picture where there's members, of course, of Jimmy's band, and Jimmy is also in it. You know, you see him right here. He's at the bottom. But also there's members of Pink Floyd and the Soft Machine and a few other different bands. The thing is, it's a lot of a lot of what these guys in the UK were aspiring to be. A lot of them were into the blues, you know. A lot of Black American blues and stuff like that, and just they really, you know, aspired to be, you know, what Hendrix already was. You know, like you had Clapton basically, you know, like they would try to basically emulate a lot of Black American blues because they were definitely influenced by it. I mean, you had subcultures that, you know, like the mod subculture, a lot of those guys were into blues and rhythm and blues at that. So a lot of these guys were, you know, were a part of that stuff too, you know, maybe not necessarily being a mod per se, but like a part of that whole British beat scene or whatever. Um, and, you know, it's almost like they were kind of fantasizing that they were these bluesmen. But yet, you know, when Jimmy came, he was not only that Black American blues person that they aspired to to kind of emulate. He had jammed with a lot of the people that they listened to, and also he was that and plus more. They got their minds blown because he was more than just their caricature or what they thought a caricature of a Black American blues person was, you know, or just what they thought, period, you know, in regards to that. Jimmy basically was giving you his style, you know, the true essence of what, that represents, but also saying you can't box me. And even with those guitarists that they're probably trying to emulate, that's the true spirit of the blues too, because it comes from a tradition, an Afro-American tradition and experience as well. That's not just characterized, it's experienced. And that's where a lot of those songs came from. So he was he blew cats' minds to the point where Eric Clapton got frustrated, I guess, like the first time he played with him because he couldn't keep up or something, and he stormed off the stage. That's what I read. I don't know if that's true. Um, but anyway, they became friends. I think Eric Clapton, and Pete Townsend went to the movies, and I guess they had never talked to each other before. And they went to a movie, looked at the screen, didn't even look at each other, and were just talking about how great Jimmy was. Keep in mind, this is even back then where blacks weren't supposedly thought of in the best light either over in the UK. You got the Notting Hill riots and all that stuff. And, I think there's something that I read in that book, Excuse Me While I Kiss the Sky. Well, Ram Holder kind of is, getting in on Jimmy, you know, um, about being black and even the way that he's been perceived and like characterized even in the media. He kind of got on Jimmy and kind of he kind of had some words, but they were really words to kind of just remind Jimmy like, hey, we're still black in this crazy system, even though you're getting all this success, but look at what these people are writing about you. I think Rolling Stone called, I have, hold on, let me get that quote. Rolling Stone magazine did this. Keep this in mind. I don't know who wrote it, but yeah. Rolling Stone magazine called him a psychedelic super spade. Isn't that racist or what? While another magazine called him the Wild Man of Moreno. I was familiar with the Wild Man of Moreno thing, and that's what Ram Holder was just basically saying, man, don't become their character, remember who you are. You guys got to read that book, Excuse Me While I Kiss the Sky. It kind of talks about stuff that most of the media won't talk about when it comes to Jimi Hendrix. Also, I'm going to post an article of a magazine that has a really clickbaity, almost offensive title to me, but I read the article and actually it's better than what I thought. But getting back to Jimmy. So even in the UK, man, that's where he blew up. People actually thought he was from there, but he was a black American, that went over there and he got big and then came back and, um, gathered us up by storm, in the US. Unfortunately, it was messed up at that time because brothers, of his caliber, most of them were pretty much, like white America weren't trying to hear them in that sense. He went over to the UK and it's almost like a boomerang thing. He went over there and then he got big and came out here and just, that's when he was appealed to America more in that regard. Here's him and Buddy Miles, the solid drummer from the band Electric Flag. Buddy's also played with Santana and a bunch of other cats, man. And him and Jimmy, played with each other. They played in bands, the band of Gypsies together. This is Jimmy and Arthur Lee. Arthur Lee is a trip because for you guys that don't know who Arthur Lee is, he was the lead singer, and I think he played rhythm guitar in the band Love. Love is a Los Angeles-based folk rock band, which pretty much also presaged punk rock, a lot of garage rock type stuff as well. Arthur, even before he formed that band, and the previous band Grassroots, was also, he wrote a lot of music for different people too. Him and Jimmy were friends, but I think they met kind of almost in conflict because of some woman that I guess, I don't know if both kind of knew or at one point one was dating that woman and one wasn't. But one thing that Arthur Lee, I remember reading an article, him talking about basically like, who's this other long-haired N-word, like, because he would see him around town. And then he also says that Jimmy kind of emulated his style a bit. Arthur did wear some pretty freaky stuff back in the day. And if you look at the Love albums, you'll see how Arthur dressed, you know. This is Jimmy with The Who, Pete Townsend over there on the left, kind of right by him. You know, I dug a lot of The Who, especially back then. Anything from the earlier stuff to to where Keith Moon passed, unfortunately. But yeah, The Who. I remember also they were trying to pick who was gonna go last between each other. Was it Jimmy or The Who? Because both put on pretty interesting stage performances, and they they just didn't want to. I think Jimmy ended up going last, and of course he just killed it. He burned it. Literally burned the performance. The Monterey Pop Festival. I think that's the one my dad went to as well. This is the band of gypsies that I was talking about with Buddy Miles, and there's Jimmy in the middle, and there's Billy Cox, who was an amazing bass player. Him and Jimmy were army buddies. And so, man, you can see Billy on the Woodstock video holding it down. Like, his bass playing was really solid and aggressive too, you know, and he could smooth it out as well. You know, he's on the Band of Gypsies album. This is the Band of Gypsies, by the way. And you'll see him playing live as well. And even I think he was on the Dick Cavett video stuff too with Juma Sultan, and I forgot Velez's brother's name that played with Jimmy. Puerto Rican dude, played percussion. But yeah, this is the Band of Gypsies right here. This is Jimmy and Eric and a few other cats or chicks. Jimmy and Eric with the, you know, the afros. Yeah, man, Jimi Hendrix, man. Seriously, y'all. This is Jimmy with Arthur Brown. For you guys that don't know who Arthur Brown is one of the godfathers of shock rock. Before Alice Cooper, before Marilyn Manson, and he's been covered. The song that was covered is actually a song that Jimi Hendrix, from what Arthur said in an interview, helped make big. I guess his song and his whole act was taken as a novelty, and Jimi Hendrix went around to these black radio stations and had this song Fire. He told them to play it. The song Fire is a trip because it's it's spooky. It's like a spooky lounge R&B, like 20th century classical horror, like scary tune. It was like Screaming Jay Hawkins on a whole, like Screaming Jay Hawkins, but even scarier without the novelty. So yeah, Arthur said that Jimmy was the one that kind of helped make that song a hit by having black radio play it. That's the story that he tells, at least. This is Jimmy and King George. I forgot George's last name, but King George, this guy next to Jimmy, is a New Yorker. He basically went to Switzerland and is known for the first blues man to play or to be in Switzerland. And his band, the King George Discovery, I think that's what they were called, was kind of like a Hendrixy, like kind of heavy, you know, psychedelic, you know, proto-metal, proto-hard rock group as well. Really good stuff. I mean, they kind of have that Hendrix influence big time. Check them out. This is Jimmy right here. A lot of people are kind of trying to downplay Jimmy's significance to heavy metal these days. Now, this is actually something by Hit Parader they put out. And it was called The Heroes of Heavy Metal Heroes. Jimmy did a lot of stuff that pretty much is staple in metal today. Aside from just playing with heavy distorted riffs, he did a lot of things that you still hear solos that are even in death metal done, like bomb drops and like alien blast and all that stuff. Just, yeah, Hendrix, people are trying to downplay his significance to heavy metal. I'm actually probably going to do a second video focusing on that more. Jimmy with his flying V. Again, this is actually a hit paraders that the poster that the magazine that poster that I said earlier came from. And again, Jimi Hendrix is I think he's being underrated these days, but if it wasn't for him, I mean, shoot, not only sonically but visually, Jimi Hendrix provided uh, how could I say this? A template for what heavy metal or heavy metal musician is all about. You know, call him proto metal or whatever, but he's a huge importance to it. So, you guys, this is just a tribute to Jimi Hendrix. May he rest in peace. And, you know, if you don't dig Jimi Hendrix, hey, that's your thing, but Jimmy's a huge inspiration on me. And, you know, I highlight like black rock stars for a reason because we are a part of not only um, music history but black history, and we're here and we're still going to be rocking madness. Jimmy added a lot, and he's influenced so many different people, from Parliament Funkadelic to Prince to Andre 2000 to Slash to anyone and everyone. He's, I mean, different genres from funk and even some R&B, you know, like, as well as like hip hop. I mean, hip hop, I've heard hip hop cats sample Jimmy, you know. Shoot, just all over the place, man. You know, like his legacy is left in sound. Anyway, this is Odd Rocker Audio Discourse for the Black History of Rock and Roll. Happy birthday, Jimi Hendrix. Rest in peace and memory eternal to your legacy. Peace.